Hey everyone, we recently read the book called Beneath the Surface by Bob Reccord, and it says steering clear of the dangers that could leave you shipwrecked. And so there's an iceberg on the front cover, and we'll have this book on our website, but we all know the story about the Titanic, and so that's what I thought, we were going to get into here. But the book actually unpacks the story of Joseph and the story of David, two men in the Bible, and what we could learn from them. So we're going to unpack a little bit on this episode and what you and we have learned from their stories.
Yeah, so we're going to paraphrase both of these stories so that we can get a little bit of content out of it and what we can take away from them. But you should definitely go read both stories in full detail yourself, because they're good stories. So the story of Joseph, we're going to start with. We're talking about not the Joseph that was married to Mary, not Jesus's earthly father, but we're talking about the Joseph that was sold into slavery by his brothers, and
he had the coat of many colors.
Exactly, that Joseph. So basically, Joseph got sold into slavery. There's a lot to this story, so you can go before this section and probably learn a little more about it too. But he ends up becoming head of the servants or whatever in Potiphar's household. Potiphar is higher up in the hierarchy in Pharaoh's kingdom, and so in the story, Potiphar's wife becomes infatuated with Joseph, and she makes advances at him and tries to get him to sleep with her and things like that. And he just continues to deny her. And at one point, she pushes herself on him so hard that he decides to just run, literally run away. And so
left his coat behind.
Yep, he left his coat behind. And so he fled the scene, and that's kind of where we're going to end the paraphrasing of the story of Joseph. That's going to be in Genesis chapter 39. Definitely go read it for yourself. Then we'll continue to the story of David. Now, this is the same David that, killed Goliath and, became king later on. And so while he is king, he's, hanging out at his castle one day, and he's, just looking out a window and sees a lady across the street taking a bath on the rooftop, and at least that's the way the story implies that it was on the roof. I mean, he could have just seen through a window, whatever. The details are slightly insignificant about that part, because what comes after is what's really important. And so her name is Bathsheba, and he decides, you know what? I like what I see here. And he's the king, so, what's he going to do? He's going to send someone to go get her and say, hey, come on over. The king wants to invite you over to the castle to come hang out. And so they hang out and do a little bit extra, and he ends up getting her pregnant. The only problem with that is they weren't married, and she was married to somebody else. And so the unfortunate situation is for her husband in this, who's just an innocent bystander, he's in the army, and so David's like, well, I got to cover this up. So he sends her husband off into battle, and then also orders someone to kill her husband so that it looks like looks like her husband died in battle. So it's like no big deal. So he can wash his hands of that situation. Now she's not married anymore, so he can take her as his wife, and then now they can cover up this whole pregnancy situation. So that's kind of where we're going to wrap up the paraphrasing of that story. Goes into a lot more detail beyond. We're going to talk about the takeaways from each of them, but you can find his story in 2 Samuel starting in chapter 11 and going from there around David and Bathsheba.
Yeah, the overall theme or common denominator there is they were both tempted.
Right.
They responded differently, which we'll unpack more in a minute, but they were both tempted, right? And temptation is at our fingertips daily.
From the time we wake up to the time we go to bed.
Yes. And I'm not sure that everyone who has an affair wakes up that morning and thinks, I'm going to have an affair today. I think it's what the book calls starts with entry-level temptations.
Right.
And leads to that and how we deal with temptation. And if we respond like Joseph did or respond like David did.
Right.
And so the book actually even has a quote from a guy who had an affair, and this is his quote directly. He says, "It was my inability to resist the entry-level temptations that led to last year's events. It's pointless to ask me the question, what were you thinking? Because the fact is, I simply wasn't thinking about it at all. I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. I blinded myself to who and what I really was. My own selfishness prevented me from being loving as a husband should love his wife. And from that point, I began to detach myself emotionally from my marriage and my children. After I placed myself in this position, I was then open to the possibility of forming an emotional bond with another person." So it really starts with those entry-level temptations. And what I got from that is, like, have you ever noticed that you can be home sometimes and not really be home? Like, you're just distant.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying that you're thinking about someone else and all that, but you can just start detaching from the person or what you have or just all the things. And then that can lead to cracking the door open for temptation to come through.
Yeah.
And, it's like, I think of it like if David saw a nude woman bathing and he was open to the entry-level temptation, so can we. And unless we make the predetermined decision to run, like Joseph did.
Right.
That he didn't stand there and think about it.
Right.
He just, he had already, decided this is how he was going to live.
And look at it this way. Joseph, essentially being a slave at that point, had no resources to help prevent him from giving into that temptation. He just had his own, willpower to say, okay, I'm going to make this decision ahead of time. David, as king, had all resources available to him to say, like, keep me from temptation. He could have hired someone to say, hey, look out the window before I go look out and see if there's a temptation there.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's a little silly and extreme, but he had all the tools at his fingertips to be able to prevent him from doing it. And Joseph had nothing. He was a slave. Like, he couldn't do anything. I mean, he ended up going to jail, after that. He ran and, hid. Like, he basically abandoned his job. I mean, there's more to that and, what Potiphar's wife said and things like that. But he still ended up in jail because of the situation. But because he was a slave and no one was, going to believe his side of it anyway. But he still held his own integrity.
Right.
At a higher standard.
Right. I think people, like you're saying, put it in nowadays, you could have an accountability partner. You can have the softwares that protect you from, searching stuff or notifying someone or, you can put those things into place to help not be those tempted, even those entry-level temptations. Yeah. But I found that, like, people make excuses. They think that they say, I can handle this. I can handle it. Or God wants me to be happy. And I haven't read anywhere in the Bible that it says God wants us to be happy. I mean, we can be blessed, but really God wants us to be holy. And also we've heard, I didn't want anyone to get hurt. Yeah. I don't want anyone to get hurt, so they just maybe start with porn. Pornography then can lead to other apps and things can lead to chatting, which then can lead to those intimate discussions, which can lead to meeting, which then can lead to an affair. So it's those just baby steps, but again, whatever cracks that door open, and then you get that entry level temptation. Are you going to run like Joseph? Or are you going to stand there and keep looking like David?
Yeah. Yeah, you have to kind of set yourself up and make your decision on that before you get to anything. So, let's talk about some of the things that we can take away from each of these stories specifically. So, what we can take away from the story of Joseph is, he understood his own weakness because he knew himself well.
Yeah.
So, he knew that he wouldn't be able to stay around that temptation. He had to flee.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was realistic, and that was that's the first line of defense against leaving ourselves wide open. Is being realistic, knowing that if I'm in this situation, I'm probably going to fail. So I need to just, get away.
Well, we're not above temptation. I think
Right.
that's like being realistic, is that God designed us like this. God designed us to desire, or get those feelings when you look at, when a man looks at a woman, or, if a woman's seduced by a man, or, feels connected to them. That's all from God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think being a realist is going, God put these desires in my heart, so of course I'm going to be tempted.
Yeah.
He just designed it for the sacred marriage,
Right.
and that. So I think that's where Joseph kind of knew himself more, and was more realistic because he was closer to God.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at it this way. Even Jesus was tempted.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Bible talks about how he was in the wilderness. I think it was 40 days, and tempted by the devil for all 40 days.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously we know the end of that story. Jesus was able to to stay away from the temptation, guard himself from the temptation. But, that just goes to show that, the only one who could stay away from temptation was still tempted.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that none of us are that strong.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but, the problem is people who don't have a realistic view of themselves tend to cover their weaknesses with a mask of strength and arrogance. Like you said, I can handle anything. I can deal with this. I can push through. I can get past it. No big deal. So, the biggest thing about Joseph, though, is he fled from the temptation. That's what we've been kind of like weaving into this whole episode so far, is like when that temptation comes, you have to be prepared already to flee, because you're not going to flee from something that feels good
Right.
if you haven't already decided, if I'm in this situation, I'm going to run from it. And so you have to have that, predetermined notion to go ahead and flee. But, because he fled, Joseph turned out to be one of the few men in the Bible that had nothing negative said about him.
Yeah.
And so that's huge. He then became a model of living according to God's guidelines. And God's hand was upon him and his family, the rest of his days.
Yeah.
And so, because he fled that temptation, he was still able to, be in God's blessing. Now, don't hear this wrong. Like, if maybe you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I've already fell to temptation.
Right.
We all have.
Right.
Like, that's okay to some kind of temptation somewhere, whether it's, sexual or against our marriage or anything else. That's okay. Don't throw in the towel just yet, because you can, God still forgives. Jesus came to forgive your sins, and so you're gonna be okay there. And so it's about retraining yourself to try and stay away from that temptation, and start living according to God's guidelines, so that you can be more in His blessing.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge key. Talking about some of the takeaways from David, what we can take away from David's story, he overestimated his strength. He was like,
I'm king.
I'm king. It's all good. Nothing can affect me. I can do this one time, and it's not going to be a big deal. And then it turned out to be a really big problem that he had to go to extreme lengths to try to cover up. He was convinced he could handle anything. He fell to his pride of being king, which then basically made him fall into that temptation and not, turn away from that temptation. He chased the temptation, had someone go and get her and bring her over. And so it was just as easy as that. Like we said in the beginning, he had all the tools to help prevent him from the temptation, but instead he used those tools the wrong way and was like, oh, cool, I can have this temptation. I'll send someone to go get her. I will kill her husband. I will then, marry her. And everything's all good. Everything looks fine from the outside, And then, after he fell to this temptation, there was a trail of violence that followed David and his household the rest of his life. And, continue reading that story and see, what continued to happen after that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why it's like I've never really compared David and Joseph
Right.
like this. And so I love that. So what can we do next? Yes, we can run, but what does that practically look like? So I think we have 4 principles that came from this book that we'll put on our website so you can read the whole book. Like there's the Bible stories, obviously, but this is specifically from Beneath the Surface book. And the first one is be careful what you view. So this is something like specifically wanted to bring up that I think y'all know what I mean by be careful what you view.
Right.
But there's even things that we talk about on the podcast that we're like, hey, we encourage you and your spouse to have sex. And if you need lingerie or something, for that experience, then we're kind of putting you into maybe the temptation here of what websites or, stores or magazines. And it's kind of like really hard to talk about, but you want to share some ideas around that?
Yeah. So, we have a partner with a company called Romantic Blessings. They are a great partner of ours. We found them, a long time ago, and basically they are a Christian website for couples who need tools for their intimacy.
I'll just say,
yeah,
lingerie, sex
toys, things like that.
Whatever,
and so,
you name it, whatever you're fancy.
And so, but the cool thing is, if you just go generically looking for any of that stuff, it's going to expose you to a lot of unnecessary things to see.
Even Amazon has, like, everyone's, so they're models. Like, they're modeling the lingerie and stuff. And so even me, I'm like, I don't even want to see this other woman wearing something that I'm trying to fit into. And so Romantic Blessings puts the piece of clothing or article on there without a model, and so you're just seeing what you're buying without possibly seeing someone else's body in it.
Yeah, exactly. And so basically it's a much safer place to browse that, and they have tons of stuff, so it's a great place to go if you're trying to add that spice into your marriage. So we will post in the show notes. We've got a discount code that we can post for you there, and you can also find it on our website. If you go to marriagepuzzle.com and find our partners, then our discount code is also listed there. But we'll post it in the show notes here so that you have it. But in case you want to remember that for a later time and you can't find this episode again, go check out marriagepuzzle.com and you'll find our partnership with them there, Romantic Blessings. So go check that out.
So that was number 1, be careful what you view. Number 2 is be careful what you think.
Yeah.
So we can't control what comes into our minds, but we can control what stays there.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's huge. You have to... Again, you have to make that predetermined decision to flee, and that's even from your own thoughts. Like, you have to be like, oh, wow, I don't know what I'm thinking about, and move on to something else. Like, figure out how to move on to something else. So control that as well.
Yeah. Number 3 is be careful what you feel. That's more emotions. I mean, I'm sure it's physically too. But I just wanted to speak to that on like what I said earlier about even disconnecting from your marriage or your current home situation. And females can get, wrapped up into novels or TV shows out there, and they paint this picture of romance, and sometimes then you can like start fantasizing emotionally with maybe someone you do know, or it's just drifting you from what you have.
Right.
And so that's where I'm like, you be careful what you feel.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a really good point, because if you get there, I mean, that kind of leads into the thoughts and feelings kind of combined there. But if you feel yourself starting to get into those certain emotions, you have to really, again, you have to make the predetermined decision, like, I'm digging my heels into the sand and I'm not letting my marriage go backwards. I'm going to move forward. And so if you feel yourself getting into those points, you have to run from those things. And then you should be having a conversation with your spouse about how you can increase your intimacy level together. That's what you have to.
Yeah, I think because it starts a lot for male or female. Before physical affairs, there can be emotional affairs, and it can happen so easily. Books is filled with stories, even personal. People like wrote their stories of how they just slip into this conversation with a neighbor or someone at a party or a coworker, and they may overshare on what's really going on at home or whatever, and before they know it, they've emotionally connected with this person of the opposite sex who's listening and there and caring. And so then it can lead to the physical act, because you think like, this is going to be so much better because this person really cares about me. And the grass isn't always greener on the other side. So
yeah, because if that person is in it for the wrong reasons, they're caring about themselves at your expense, which is going to feel like they care about you, and that's going to feel good. And again, you're not going to run from something that feels good unless you've made the predetermined decision to do so. Kind of beating that dead horse there. But last one here, that kind of leads into the last one. Be careful where you go. I mean, be careful where you go, who you're talking to, things like that. We've heard stories of people who are like, look, I'm never going to go somewhere by myself, because if I'm by myself, there's an opportunity for me to be put in a situation where either I'm going to fall into temptation or even be accused of something, which is a whole different scenario. I mean, do with that what you will. I mean, I think yeah, you mentioned it, like traveling, like where you're not going to travel alone on a plane or have your own hotel room or anything like that. Obviously it's going to be hard to for the average person to have someone with them when they have to go to the post office or something. It's so don't be too. You don't have to be so extreme with it, or you can. We have our own
personal boundaries of like, we don't ride in a vehicle with someone the opposite sex. Like, there's, like, okay, maybe there's very few if I'm broken down the side of the road, but I'm going to, like, call you first and be like, hey, this person is coming to get me, but I'm just not going to be like, hey, I'm just going to, like, ride to work every day with this coworker and increase that time of emotional connection and things that we just probably are just doing, not thinking about it. But that's what happens when you're, like, having an affair. You did it without thinking about all the things that are going to come after that.
Yeah, exactly. So, overall, taking all those into consideration, like, flee when temptation shows up, but even better, avoid situations that it could show up. Yeah. So think ahead about that stuff so that you can be ready for it. Yeah. So thanks for checking us out for this one. We hope that you enjoyed this. We hope you're gaining something from it. Make sure you go get the book. We're going to have it listed on our website, marriagepuzzle.com/books. Make sure you go check out the partnership with Romantic Blessings and check on the notes of the podcast for that discount code. But you can also find that on our website as well, marriagepuzzle.com. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and keep on coming back. We'll see you next time.